It's time to look at feeding our garden plants. Hi everyone and welcome back to the garden on a dull but exciting day. I've got my tender plants in the ground now, planted out yesterday, the Enseti banana and the bedding under there. The Gunnerer is getting bigger and bigger by the day. And in today's video, I want to talk all about fertilisers and plant feeding. How I use my 3-step process to get all these plants growing throughout the year, but with a slight bias towards the summer months. As we're now in mid-May, it's really now time to press on that accelerator and get everything racing up towards the sky. I want to talk about then the products that I use here to get ginormous Gunnerer growth, to get amazing healthy looking palms, to get a summer tropical display that's vibrant and larger than life, and also what I do to look after my bamboo here to get it looking stunning, phenomenal and vibrant all the way through the year. So really an overview. If you've got a tropical style garden, there'll be something in this video for you. And I also want to touch on growing planted containers, what I do for mine here. But this isn't purely theoretical or scientific, more of an overview of the products I use, how I use them, when I use them. You see, my feeding has changed over the years, so I want to talk about what I've moved away from and how now my feeding, how I look after this garden, is definitely more efficient than it's been in recent years. But as you can see, the growth is certainly backing it up. The results are there. So anyway, enough talking, let's get into it with step one. Step one then is by far the most important thing that you can do for your garden plants. The best thing you can add to your soil to get some phenomenal growth throughout the whole year. Whether you're looking at plants that stay in the ground like palms and bamboos behind me, this one that just keeps smacking me in the back of the head, or the more summer tropical style bedding, this is the most important step. I think I've stressed it enough now. Obviously, step one, as I've mentioned in the past, is all about soil improvement, amendment, and there's a lot of different things that you can use. In the past, I've used well-rotted farmyard manure that you can get from either a local source near to you, or you can buy it in bags, you can get it delivered direct to you. It's not ridiculously expensive, but obviously it's a bit of work putting it on the ground. Absolutely worth it though. Or you can use soil conditioners that you can get in bags from your local DIY superstore. I'm sure there's lots of places you can go to. You might have seen me use recently, as I built my new raised bed, this here on the top of it. This is a soil improver. This one looks a little bit dusty. It's clearly just broken down organic matter. Obviously, the ones that are more farmyard manure-y, you can definitely tell it's farmyard manure, and I maybe wouldn't be picking it up so enthusiastically. But whatever you use, adding organic matter to your soil is the number one thing that you can do to get all this lush plant growth with minimal effort through the growing season. Obviously, this is something I've spoken about before and I feel passionately about, but there aren't really any quick fixes when it comes to feeding. Well, there's definitely a few quick tips that I'll show you later on in today's video, but if you want the best growth long-term out of your garden, whether you're looking at plants that stay in the ground or simply ones that you want to get the most out of through a short summer period, then feeding your soil is the priority. And in fact, you might have heard that phrase before, feed the soil, not the plants. And when it comes to soil improvement, that's what it's all about. Adding a lot of organic matter, well, in the past I've used the analogy of a human diet. Yes, there's things like supplements and vitamins that we'll touch on later in the video, but really adding organic matter to your soil, bulky organic matter, is the basis of this. It's just eating good, healthy food. That produces 90% of the results. The rest really is just the icing on the cake. But adding organic matter, it has so many benefits to your garden. I mean, first off, I use it here as a mulch. Now, one thing I will say, I don't apply organic matter to the whole garden every single year. It's something I really limit to my jungle area here. I don't need it really on a lot of the arid area, the Mediterranean plants. But in today's video, I really want to focus on the jungle style plants and the more tropical style summer display, the exciting plants I grow here to really get big leaves and beautiful flowers. And what I do is, probably every couple of years, every few years, just apply a nice thick layer of organic matter to one bed or border at a time. Yes, it'd be nice to do the whole garden to see everything set up for long-term growth, but in reality, you know, the cost of things and actually the time spreading it out is something where, unless you've got quite a small garden, it definitely takes its time and not something I can justify doing for every single year. But when I do it, I absolutely see the results and it lasts for several years. That organic matter disappears into the soil and that's really where the magic happens. You see, what organic matter does, whilst it isn't massively high in your NPK, the nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium that are the building blocks to water plant growth, it adds a lot of structure to the soil. As it breaks down, you get a lot more worms in your soil, coming up to the surface, dragging it down, and they continue to operate, bringing leaves and decay matter down. That helps improve the structure of the soil, making it easier for your plants to get the roots down, making them more resilient throughout dry periods, more able to pick up moisture and nutrients from the surrounding earth. And then you've got the mycorrhizal activity. There's still so much we're finding out about. Check out my video over at Dr. Simon Olpin's Jungle Garden. I'll link to it in the description below, where he enthusiastically talks about how adding to the soil really is the key for his exceptional jungle garden over in Sheffield. So basically, it improves the structure of the soil, it improves the life under the soil, and it does that in a way that synthetic fertilisers don't do. So if you're willing to put in the effort, if you want the best results possible, add an organic matter. If you think of a pyramid of soil improvement, this is the base that everything else stands on, the foundation. And if you want any further proof, just check out any of my garden tours. I'm pretty sure you have a look at Shane Bilson's garden, the Secret Garden of Louth, Matt's Creative Tiki Garden, Simon Maybury's Jungle Garden over in Leeds, well, definitely the 50 Shades of Green garden. Wherever you see a garden supporting a wealth of lush and vibrant planting, chances are they really prioritise soil improvement and adding a lot of organic matter. It really is that important. But before I descend into rambling and pseudoscience, you obviously know that this is the best thing you can do. But what do I do and when in practical terms? Well, usually I add organic matter as a mulch, and I tend to do it at the back end of the year, late autumn, where for me here, as I grow a lot of more tender plants in my jungle garden, that layer of organic matter on the soil, a deep layer is always better than a very thin one that disappears in no time. That can actually help protect the roots, rhizomes, corms and tubers of plants like Cannas which stay in the ground, so it has that benefit. Alternatively, some people apply it in late winter, early springtime, where it can help also trap a lot of moisture into the soil, which is particularly something that we might have seen this year when quite a wet winter turned into a very dry spring. There's driest spring on record, in fact. So if you applied that layer of organic matter in late winter time, well done. It'll have helped to keep a lot of that moisture trapped into the soil as we're headed into the spring months, and it'll also help prevent weeds coming up too. It definitely has a lot of benefits. But would I apply a lot of organic matter to the garden now? No. Now, you might have seen me add some to my new raised bed area. So it's definitely something well worth doing. If you're building a new raised bed like I've done there, add a good layer of it. If you plant up a new part of your garden, sure, you can add it as a mulch or dig it into it. And it's also a great time to add it on top of pots and containers, particularly if you grow cannas, bananas, things like that. But would I add it to the soil in most of the garden beds and borders now? No. And the reason for that is very simply, the soil at the minute is so incredibly dry here that if you apply a layer of organic matter, such as soil conditioner, soil improver on top of it, all you'll really do is actually lock a lot of the moisture, as it does actually rain over the next couple of weeks, out to the soil. So I would definitely hold off. Now is a great time to add it to pots and containers, like I said, or maybe put around some new tender planting once you've given them a good soak in. But it's something just to keep in mind for the back end of this year. But there's something that you can do now to get a lot of the same benefits, but really boost your plants over the next couple of months, and that is step 2. Next up then, we're going to look at some products that you can apply to your garden now for massive growth this summer. And in fact, this week is a great time to do it before the rain comes next week and helps them settle into the soil. These are actually the secret behind the success of my gunnerer. I say success, it's getting bigger than I could possibly fit in here, but I'm going to keep enjoying it regardless. A lot of people message and ask me on Instagram, how do I feed the gunnerer? How do I get it so big? The answer, well, definitely last year I was very lazy with my feeding. I fed these plants once, but it's all about what you feed them and when. So this is something that you can do now. Looking back, if that heavy soil improvement was soil conditioner, soil improver, rotted farmyard manure, if that really is the bulk of a healthy diet, the actual food, then this next tip is all about, we'll say, a nutritious snack. These can make all the difference at the right time, and I'll show you what I've used now. These are chicken manure pellets, which I'm sure a lot of you have used in your garden too. Now, I'll put links in the description below for all the products I talk about. Some you can get on Amazon quickly and cheaply, others might be a little bit cheaper on eBay, so definitely shop around. As much as I use Amazon associate links like everyone else to get a tiny commission at no cost to yourself, I'd much rather you get the right thing at the right cost, save yourself some money, and get a fantastic summer garden as a result. So definitely check out the description for more buying tips. But these chicken manure pellets have been one of the keys to my garden's success. More recently, last year I did a video talking about this after my success in 2023, is this Vitax 6X. Again, a very concentrated, a very strong feed, and also like the chicken manure pellets, they're organically derived but very high in nitrogen. So I guess On the basis of it being organically derived, they do improve your soil. They maybe don't have the same sort of structural benefits as adding a lot of soil conditioner would, but in these, the nutrition is really ramped up. They're very concentrated, and like I mentioned, high in nitrogen. What does that mean? Well, basically, you get a lot of leafy growth on your plants very quickly. So these are a great feed for the big leafy plants in your garden. I'm talking Gunneria, Rodgersia, a lot of the plants I spoke about in my last video and the one before it, looking around Linden nurseries. If you grow hostas, ferns, anything with vibrant leafy growth that looks beautiful and verdant in spring, these will be great for it. When do I apply them? Well, actually, I applied these feeds, as I talked about in a previous video, early spring. We'll say mid-spring around April is great for the Gunnerias. Essentially, when plants come into growth, that is the best time to feed them. And you can pretty much leave it there. Or alternatively, give plants a nice midsummer feeding to really get them growing away. But when it comes to the tropical style plants, in pots and containers especially, those you can add it, we'll say any time around now. Now you've maybe brought your insetti out, you've got them growing in large pots close to your house, or you maybe got mini garden borders. As those plants now are settled in, the roots are just getting into the ground, now is a great time to add some of these feeds. And for me, these feeds really are a sweet spot. They're very easy to apply. Personally, I think they're quite economical. Although Mark, in my last video round at his crazy tiki garden, spoke about how he's reluctant to spend £25 on a bag of chicken manure pellets. I think for the amount you get, 20 to 25 kilos, I think that's great value for money. And the Vitax 6X is currently around £11, £12. Again, you're getting a lot of goodness for the amount of money you spend. And probably most importantly is it's very efficient and easy to apply. Simply chuck it around your garden. I generally tend to follow the instructions, but for a lot of the real tropical style summer plants, the bananas, the cannas, the gingers, that are very, very greedy plants and thrive on a rich mixture of basically a lot of everything while it's hot in summer, I definitely tend to up things a lot and chuck a good few handfuls in, but the growth that comes out of it is amazing. Now, one tip I will give, whether you choose to go for something like chicken manure pellets, the Vitax 6X, or maybe even use blood, fish and bone as a more granular feed, is definitely apply it before you give it a proper soaking in. Or better still, apply it this week, maybe this weekend, before the rain comes, and it really helps break it down quickly and wash it into the soil. Because if you've got dogs, I know a lot of them can tend to really go for these feeds, which isn't ideal. And also the smell over the few days when you put it into the garden, it's definitely something to notice. So certainly get it done before a heavy rainfall, make sure you wash it in properly, and don't do it the day before a barbecue, otherwise you'll end up with a smell and a lot of flies buzzing around. But if you can live past that, these feeds to me really are the sweet spot between adding organic matter to your soil. They do so much more good than purely synthetic feeds would do, and also delivering nutrients quickly. If you want something to add to your garden now, these are the feeds to go for. Vitax 6X, chicken manure pellets, blood, fish and bone. Together, these are all slow release feeds that will feed your garden for the next couple of months, the next few months even, but also help improve the soil and support balanced, healthy growth through our summer months. To summarise then, I apply a lot of these organically derived slow release feeds to the plants that need them in the garden when they need it. So that can mean around the Gunneria, Rodgersia, Ligularia, hostas, basically any plant that whilst they might not be truly tropical, they definitely have a tropical style effect, a real exotic look to them, and have big lush leaves that grow a lot in a short time. I apply it in around April time. Basically when the plants start growing, I put a bit around them. These are also great as a general purpose feed around your garden. Even palms, tree ferns especially, will appreciate a good sprinkling round. And then as I plant out my tender plants like these here, once you've got them in the ground, just again, a nice sprinkling around them. So as you water them in, they've got nutrients slowly seeping into the soil. And you can, if you want to be more diligent, proactive with your feeding, you can around early July time, give everything a nice good dumping again to really see them through the warmest months of the year. But I know what you're thinking, George, you're giving the plants now a nice nutritious snack. Surely a drink would really help that go down well. Exactly, it certainly would. And the drink in question is this here, liquid seaweed. Now I've used a few brands of this before. Again, I'll put my pics in the description below. This is something that really helps your garden. Now, I've seen a couple of people on Facebook talk about how if you're choosing fertilisers, something like this isn't massively high in NPK, those key nutrients that we always look for in fertilisers. And that's definitely true. You can get a lot of synthetic feeds, one which we'll look at very soon, which are much higher in those nutrients. But for me, this liquid seaweed, it brings other benefits to the garden. Now, obviously, I'm going off other research here and other people's experiences, but liquid seaweed is supposedly good in your garden because of the trace elements. It's not always about those big three. You see, adding other minerals to your garden, trace elements, those are what really bring everything together. And I guess it's the same when we look at our food as human beings. Yes, we want the carbohydrates, the fats, the proteins, but it's also the vitamins, the minerals. There's so many other substances that we can buy in tablet form as shots and whatever that really help do so much for our overall health and well-being. And I think it's the same with this liquid seaweed. One of the things that I've read about this is it really does help improve the resilience of plants, resilience to longer periods of drought, to pests and diseases. Well, for me, this is something really important going forward, and something which I also have heard described as a growth stimulant. So whilst it might not be completely high in a lot of the nutrients, such as many of your really over-the-top shouty fertilisers are, which again I'll look at very soon, I think this is a very worthwhile addition to your garden, and something which I'd apply in pretty much the same way as the chicken manure pellets and the Vitax 6X. Early spring for those plants which start growing earlier, and then throughout summer for the plants which definitely really put on the growth for our magnificent summer months, which hopefully will be on the way very, very soon again. I also use this as a dilute feed around tree ferns. I'd say if you want a rough idea, half strength around tree ferns can give them a good feed maybe every month or so if you really want to be on top of it. Maybe normal strength for palms. It's a great feed for palms just to give them a nice boost. And then when it comes to the real tropical plants, which you absolutely want to be racing away to make the most of our summer, I always go double strength. Nothing scientific there. I just tend to double things up, give them a nice rich mixture. And honestly, the growth over the summer months, once you've got these plants settled in, well watered, well fed, and we get some really warm days, stand back and just watch them grow. It really is a treat. So liquid seaweed, again, very inexpensive for the amount that you get. I always recommend saving up, buying a larger tub, definitely better value that way. And as always, I'll put a few links in the description below for the products that you can get to help your garden this summer. A couple of things I will mention about liquid seaweed. Someone actually commented in my previous video talking about feeding, asking about feeds which aren't animal derived, i.e. your bloodfish and bone or chicken manure pellets. So in that case, liquid seaweed is a great organic based feed that can really do so much for your soil without relying on those sources. Another thing which I read several years ago, which is something I've always followed here but haven't really investigated, is not to use it on bamboo plants because of the salt content. Now, I'm aware that most liquid seaweeds, the salt content is actually quite minimal and a lot lower than most soluble feeds, but it's something to keep in mind anyway. I will talk about bamboos later in this video and why I don't feed them at this part of the year and what I do use to feed them later on in summer. But before that, let's get on to some more feeds for our garden that you can use right now. Now, I know what you're thinking. You started this video very sensibly, George. You talked about adding lots of soil improvers, rotted farmyard manure, really improving feeding the soil for long-term health, resilience, and really amazing plants. You then spoke about the things that we can do now, which definitely take a bit of work, cost a bit of money, but actually produce results longer term. But we want some instant hits, George. You promised us rocket fuel for our plants. You promised us phenomenal summer growth, massive leaves, huge flowers, plants that grow to 3 meters high in a single season. Well, this is where things get a little bit easier and we start to talk about soluble feeds. This is Miracle Grow, but in the past I've also used Chempact too. There's a lot of feeds that are soluble that you can mix up and really give your plants an intense boost of nutrients to get the most tropical style summer growth absolutely possible here during our preciously short summer months. I know a lot of you watching really want to know, what can I do now to get the most growth possible? How can I put in the least time and get the most results? That's perfectly normal. And particularly when it comes to pots containers, well, have I got a treat for you. Miracle Grow. I'll put a link to this in the description below, but you can buy this anywhere. If you're very impatient, go to local bargain stores, you will see it everywhere and it's very, very cheap. It is a synthetic fertiliser, so it's not something that I'd recommend drenching the soil with. Just look at the current state of most fields in our country to really get an idea of what overdoing fertiliser long term does for the quality and health of the soil. But if you want fast growth, particularly when it comes to Cannas, bananas, Colocasias, those real tropical style plants that get growing when the warmth comes, this will support that magnificent growth very, very well. You can also use Chempact number 2, which isn't actually an old 90s song. It's a great variant of something like this, which is basically skewed to be high in nitrogen. So great for those bananas, great for those Cannas again, Basically great for any tropical style plant which puts out a lot of big leaves very, very quickly. A couple of things I will say about this. You'll notice on the front it says grows plants twice as big, a little asterisk at the end there. I think it's important to say it won't necessarily grow your plant twice as big. Otherwise, I'd definitely be having a lot of fun with it here. I imagine though in laboratory conditions, one plant given this versus another grown in very sterile, inert conditions, I can easily see how a plant given these nutrients in abundance would definitely grow to twice the size. But here, it's definitely just another tool in our arsenal, along with things like Tomerite and also the Chem Pack number 2, to really get some magnificent summer growth out of those tropicals that really make the most of our summer months here. The second thing I mentioned is the colour of this. When you're using the scoop to put it in your watering can and you get it on your hands, it does take a while to come off, and it's bright blue. It looks like you've been misbehaving with a Smurf, and it definitely takes some time to get off your hands. So if you need to keep your hands clean, maybe wear gloves or pour it in without touching it. Be very careful because it definitely lingers. But like I mentioned, it is a synthetic feeder. It only makes sense for it to be a ridiculous colour like blue, doesn't it? So the magic question then, how do I use it in my garden? Well, actually over the summer months, this is still something I use now, but in the past I used it a lot more regularly. And essentially I make a super cocktail. I get the watering can ready, I put a couple of scoops of that Miracle Grow in, and then I usually add either some liquid seaweed or Tomerite, which is great for fruiting or flowering plants like the Cannas and the gingers, or alternatively some Chem Pack number 2 to add even more nitrogen for lush banana and canna growth. I then put it in the watering can, add the water, mix it all up, and get a beautiful cocktail, a heady mix of rocket fuel, which absolutely helps the tropical style plants. So here in my garden, I don't tend to give a lot to the Gunnera, but really the Musabaju, if I can be bothered to, I give it to those. But where this mix really comes in is for potted tropical style plants. Plants like the bananas, the cannas, the gingers. You might find if you're growing in pots yourself, especially if you haven't actually had a polytunnel or greenhouse to keep them in over winter and give them a head start, they're only just poking through the soil now. So I find really all these nutrients really added now can help those plants make the most of our summer months. Because if we get a cool summer, they can grow away quite steadily. And especially when it comes to gingers, if they set off too late and we don't get that summer heat, you might not even get flowers, which is the main point of growing them. So I think really, particularly when it comes to potted plants, really boosting them with a heady mixture of this every few weeks, something like that, particularly while it's hot in the middle of summer, really does support an amazing amount of growth. Definitely a top tip. As much as I talk about sustainability and long-term soil health, when it comes to short-term plants in pots, I definitely recommend getting the most growth out of them possible, particularly when it's cannas, gingers, which you're going to split up over the years anyway. However, when it comes to longer-term plants in pots, I've grown several palms in pots, for example. Those you need to be a little bit more careful. Not just to create a more balanced feed to support sustainable growth over time, but also because a lot of soluble feeds, such as a Miracle Grow, for example, contain lots of salts, which can build up over time and actually have a negative effect on your plant's growth. So when it comes to palms in pots especially, there is a better feed that you can use. As I mentioned in my last video, looking around this jungle part of my garden, this is the feed that I use for pots. This is a Hardy Palms slow release fertiliser. Again, I'll put a link to it in the description below. Not an affiliate link or anything like that, just so you can get this product. $17.99 for a 2 kilo tub. If you get a couple, you can spread the post out further. That's what I always do. This is really the best food, I think, for palms here in my garden. Why do I think it's the best? I know you can get soluble palm feeds, but personally, I just think this is so incredibly easy. Literally get 3, 4, 5 scoops around every palm in your garden, chuck it down, and let the water wash it into the soil. It lasts 2 or 3 months. What more could you need? And it's great for palms in pots too. You can get soluble palm feeds again from Hardy Palms, which do actually have a lot less salt than the equivalent Miracle Grow would do. So I would certainly recommend, whilst on the whole, I'm not really one for specific plant feeds. I think you can spend a lot of money that way when it comes to palms in the garden. A little bit of the organic-based feeds I've talked about, but then when you really want to build up those trace elements, particularly the magnesium to keep those leaves lush and green, especially after a colder winter, I think this really is a great shout. So personally here, I've given my palms 1 application now, and then we'll say around midsummer, probably late July, somewhere around there, I'll give them a second one. But with most plants in the ground, especially palms, I tend to stop feeding at the end of August, and that way you're not getting a lot of new, softer growth pushing out as we especially head nearer to winter. You want the palm to naturally harden off and the growth to slow down as the temperatures start to drop. But anyway, let's not talk too much about the end of the season when we've got so much amazing sun in front of us. When it comes to the diet analogy then, like I mentioned, the real soil improvement is the food. The slow-release but organically derived feeds like the chicken manure pellets and Vitax 6X are a nice, healthy, nutritious snack. I very much see all these feeds, the water-soluble ones, all these very specific palm feeds, as pretty much the nutrients, the vitamins that you add to a complete diet to really fill in those missing gaps and create an overall balanced and very healthy recipe for long-term success. But when it comes to palms in pots, I used to put in a lot more effort than I do now. I used to use a mixture of palm booster, liquid seaweed and also palm focus throughout the summer months, which really got them growing incredibly well. I know generally I do talk about getting palms in the ground as quick as you can. And when you see palms like this Trachypis nova, which was in a 30-litre pot, planted out, and now it's massive, it's growing so well. They really do grow so much better in the ground and don't need a lot of feeding here in the UK. At the end of the day, our soil is probably more nutritious and there's certainly more rain here than most of them probably expect anyway. But more feed definitely supports more palm growth, and combined with regular watering, it really helps you make the most of our summer months, which I've already talked about how precious they are. Just think about it, in our climate here, we maybe only get 6 months when they can really race away. So if you can support that growth, it definitely is worth it. And particularly if you're growing your palms in pots long term, if you are choosing to do that, combined with regular watering, and maybe repotting every 2-3 years, I would recommend being a bit more diligent with the feeding, but be wary not to use the Miracle-Gro. Sure, in the ground, I think at this time of the year, when you really want to get things moving, there's no threat of cold on the horizon, I think you can use products like Miracle-Gro on palms. I've heard of other people using it. I've seen someone with a massive jubea that they grow from small in the garden, and they just use Miracle-Gro to feed it, boost it along. So in all honesty, I think there's nothing wrong with that. At the end of the day, nutrients are nutrients to an extent. But when it comes to pots and creating a long-term healthy environment within that pot, I personally would recommend the Palm Focus or a soluble palm feed from Hardy Palms mixed in with that palm booster. You see, palm booster is actually a rooting hormone or root stimulant. And what it helps that plant to do is create a very vigorous and healthy root system, which is important for palms which you've transplanted out in your garden. It's important for newly planted palms, but I think it's also really crucial for plants in pots too. You want that root system to be as healthy and vigorous as possible to get as much moisture in, particularly while they're in restricted, less than optimal conditions. So I honestly would recommend, if you grow a lot of palms in pots or containers, assuming it's not hundreds and hundreds where you might have to rely on a more commercial option, I honestly would go for something like the Palm Focus, occasionally the Palm Booster, and a nice dose of liquid seaweed every few weeks over the summer months to really get the most growth possible out of them. But that's enough for palms. What do I do when it comes to bamboo? One tip then that I will mention for bamboo, and this is something that I read from an experienced grower many years ago, and something that's definitely stuck with me since. You will see a lot of the growth visually from bamboos in spring, where the culms generally emerge from mid to late spring, early summer in some cases, like this Vivax over here, and they grow rapidly to full height over just a matter of weeks or a couple of months. You see all that growth then, and you might logically think that a lot of nitrogen is the way forward, and you might have some success with it. Sure, it supports a lot of that growth, the leafiness that appears very, very quickly, but one thing that I have read about bamboo, and this I know for a fact, those rhizomes grow in late summer and then through autumn. So essentially, the size and eventual height of those culms is pretty much set in stone from the size of the rhizome below. So all the growth that you're seeing now on plants out here, this Fagiceae robusta Campbell, this is growing from the result of last year's effort, last year's sun, last year's moisture, getting that rhizome going and getting it ready to shoot up. In the past, I have supported these plants with a lot of nitrogen during spring, and if you give them too much, these culms, the new growth here, can end up getting a little bit floppy, and no one wants that. The wind can very easily snap them off. So one thing that I picked up on from this post that I read is all about feeding bamboo in the summer months and into the autumn. So what I do is use the chicken manure pellets and also bloodfish and bone throughout summer into autumn when they're getting charged up by the sunlight, buoyed on by the heat, all that water soaking in, swelling the rhizomes up. That's when you can support the growth and really get some big culms shooting ready for next year. So that's generally what I'd recommend. Feed your bamboo from summer through to early autumn. Keep applying a lot of organic matter through the summer months. Here in my garden, around this large Vivax here, it's pretty much a compost heap. Any chopped off tree fern fronds, removed foliage, any of the comfrey or borage that I chop off from further down the garden, it all goes on the base here and it rots down very quickly. But later summer, early autumn is when I really choose to give them that boost of feed. And another thing that I will just add, whilst a nice boost of nitrogen in spring, it's not going to hurt them, I'm sure. You can use lawn feed. I know lots of people recommend it as a very economical, affordable, cheap source of nitrogen. Just be very careful that it's also not a feed and weed, because if it's got any kind of weed killer mixed in with it, it might have unexpected results on plants like bamboo. So just be very careful if you're getting lawn feed that it does just contain the fertiliser. So there we go then. Whilst feeding is always something I can be more diligent and consistent with here in my garden, undoubtedly most of the results here in my garden, the plants that have flourished and the other gardens that I've visited well, have come from that real good diet of improving the soil in the first place, those healthy snacks at the right time of the year, and then supporting the real flamboyant growth in summer with a nice dose of some healthy vitamins to really boost them up. That is honestly how my garden gets fed here. There's nothing more to it than that. In the past, like I said, I've used a few more feeds, I've applied them more regularly, and over the years, I guess I've been more, we'll say, efficient with my feeding in terms of what I apply to the garden. I don't spend a huge amount of money on it, but what I do find is if you invest in your soil and invest in these plants, at the end of the day, that growth will more than make up for it. It really can make the difference between a plant which merely survives through summer and one that performs. A plant which comes through winter without a problem and one which goes into winter already stressed and then might potentially take more damage. I know boiled down, this is a pretty tragic show and tell behind me here, but I hope this video has been helpful. And in fact, thinking about it, this is my water. But if this dry spring turns into a dry summer, then I think looking at all those, although they will really do some good for your garden, this is probably going to be the key. And in fact, in my last jungle video, when I showed you around the garden here, the plants which are struggling, I think here, have been a result of winter damage and also needing more of this. So honestly, if we get a long, dry, hot summer, watering is key. The other feeds will definitely help, but if you don't water a plant, there's no point feeding it and expecting the same results. Every plant I've shown you here in my garden, from the tree ferns, the bamboo, the palms, through to the tropical style summer display, all thrive on a mixture of nutrients, a good, rich, healthy soil, and also plenty of moisture. So there we go. I hope today's video's helped. And if there isn't anything that I've addressed or you've got any further questions, feel free to leave them in the comments section below and I'll come back to you as soon as I can. I hope you've all had a great weekend and I'll see you all very soon. See you later.